All right, let's jump right in. We're going to talk about a really powerful way to think about turning, the absolute worst situations into something amazing. This whole idea comes from a classic sermon by Emerson Fosdick, and it gives us this incredible framework for not just getting through a bad mess, but actually making it one of the best things that could ever happen to you. I mean, we've all been there, right? That feeling of being totally stuck. Maybe it's a job you hate, a tough relationship, or just one of those seasons in life where nothing seems to be working. You feel trapped, hopeless, and all you can think is, I gotta get out of here. Well, our story today starts with a guy who felt exactly like that. So where does our story begin? It starts in a place that's a perfect stand-in for any tough spot you might be facing. Let's get into our first section, a place called Crete. Okay, so picture this. A man named Titus gets left on the island of Crete in the Mediterranean. And to put it lightly, this was not some tropical paradise vacation. It had a reputation for being a really, really tough place. A place where it was hard just to be a decent person, let alone try to build anything good. And look, this isn't just some random insult somebody cooked up. The source material calls this a blistering verse, because this was literally the common saying about the people from Crete. This was their reputation. Can you imagine being told your job is to work with people everyone describes like that? This was the mess Titus was in. So how did Titus feel about all this? Exactly how you or I would feel. Completely and utterly hopeless. He looked around and just saw a disaster with, zero chance of success. You can just imagine him writing a letter, begging, "Get me out of here. This is impossible." All he wanted to do was run. So Titus wants out. Makes perfect sense. But the response he gets is, well, it's completely unexpected. And that brings us to our second section, a surprising mission. This is where the whole problem gets flipped on its head. So Titus sends his desperate message to his mentor, Paul. He lays out all the problems, the liars, the beasts, the total lack of hope, and he's probably expecting, a rescue plan. But the reply he gets back is the absolute last thing he could have imagined. It was a total shock. Paul writes back and essentially says, Titus, you've described the situation perfectly. It's a horrible mess, and that is the exact reason I left you there. Just listen to that line again. For this cause left I thee in Crete. Paul isn't arguing with him. He's agreeing with him. And this is the giant twist. This is the big aha moment. The problem wasn't an obstacle getting in the way of the mission. The problem was the mission. The fact that the people there were liars, evil beasts, and idle gluttons wasn't a reason to leave. It was the entire point of him being there in the first place. The whole situation gets completely reframed. This radical shift in thinking leads us right into our third section, which is really the core lesson of this whole thing. Create, don't find. So here's the bottom line. It's this incredibly powerful idea. See, Titus was wandering around Crete trying to find a good situation. He was looking for happiness, for a decent chance, for a reason to stay, and he couldn't find one. Paul's message was like a splash of cold water, telling him, you don't find a meaningful life. You take whatever you're given and you create one. The source makes this really clear distinction. What we find in the world is just existence. It's the circumstances we're handed, the good and the bad. But a real life, that's what we create. We take those circumstances, whatever they are, and see them as raw material to build something, like a masterpiece. One is just a starting point. The other is what we build ourselves. The point is, it really doesn't matter if your starting point is a mess like Crete or some perfect paradise. Your circumstances are never the final word. They're just the clay, the marble, the canvas you've been given. The real question is never, what did I find here? It's, what am I going to create with this? Okay, so that's a great idea, but how do we actually apply this when we're staring down our own personal Cretes? That brings us to section 4 and this fantastic analogy, making friends with your tiger. We all have a Crete in our lives. It could be a tough project at work, a personal weakness we're struggling with, or just a difficult environment. And our first instinct is always to treat it like an enemy, right? We fight it, we complain about it, we try to run away from it. The real challenge is to stop seeing it as the bad guy. And let's be real, complaining is easy. The source says it perfectly. It is much easier to denounce than to build. It feels kind of good to stand back and just list all the things that are wrong with our situation. But it doesn't actually get us anywhere. The real, meaningful work is in building. So the source shares this wonderful little story about a boy who kept having nightmares about a tiger. A psychologist gives him some strange advice. He says, next time you see the tiger in your dream, just hold out your hand and say, "Hello, old chap."
The boy does it, and poof, the nightmares stop. He made friends with his tiger. And that's the process for us too. Face the fear, reframe it, extend a hand, and turn that enemy into an ally.
The deeper message here is that the very thing that scares us, that situation we can't stand, it actually holds a hidden power. It's like those old myths about dragons. When the hero finally faces the terrifying beast, it often transforms into something helpful, a source of strength. Our Crete can become our greatest asset if we just have the courage to engage with it instead of running from it.
And all of this leads us to our final section, to the ultimate reward for facing our challenges head-on, the joy of creation.
So let's bring it all back home. What happened to Titus, the guy who wanted nothing more than to escape the mess of Crete? Did he just, grit his teeth and survive? Or did something else happen entirely? What happened was nothing short of staggering. Crete, that supposedly hopeless place, became a powerhouse of positive change. They built incredible churches. It became a hub for training new leaders. And Titus, the man who wanted to leave, he became a local legend. They eventually called him Saint Titus.
And this shows us what the real prize is. It's not just about winning or succeeding, it's about a feeling. As the source says, the deepest joy in life is creativeness. That feeling of taking a situation that's a total mess, seeing its potential, and building something new, that's a kind of satisfaction that nothing else can really touch.
And that's the beautiful irony of it all. As soon as Titus switched his mindset from finding a good situation to creating one, everything changed. The very place he couldn't wait to escape from became the source of his greatest joy and purpose. You get the feeling that once he got started, you couldn't have paid him to leave. So we end with this question, turning it back to you. We all have a Crete, that difficult situation, that challenging part of our lives, that internal struggle. The question isn't, how fast can I get away from this? The real question is, what is your Crete and what are you going to create there?